close these relations were. Many times, and they were associated with the church a lot of times, but a lot of times they were associated with family that was in the church from another place or whatever. And I think that people who don't get to see that, they're missing a lot, because the church is a family. And you may run into, and if you have faithful members of the church that are traveling through the world, and you run into the bonds that you create are much stronger than anything that you would, I think we take that for granted.
I agree. Just like going on other parts of the world, you can go to the next town and go to a Lord's church and meet people. It's important. It's very good. Good point. Thank you. We're not going to get off on this because I, don't have a lot of knowledge about it, but there's fasting. Some people fast for focus and for clarity. Okay? Frank?
I have an interesting story.
Okay, let's hear it.
About going to church in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so I went to church in Sri Lanka and worshiped very well, and I missed Larry Fryer the day. That was where he was worshiping, and he just wasn't there that day. He was someplace else. So we meet here.
So did you meet some nice people there?
Yeah. Yes, I did. They even took me to lunch.
Okay. That's what happens.
I guess Larry taught them well.
Hospitality, it's important. Steve?
When I was much younger, I used to work out with weights, 3 days on, 1 day off, 6 days a week. Well, when I went on vacation, I looked up a gym. I wanted to find a gym because that was what was important to me. Going to church was not at that time, sadly, but it's all in your priorities. Ever since 2012, I've been on permanent vacation. So that's what I tell everybody. I don't get to go a whole lot of places, but that's okay. But yeah, it's all in the priority.
And it's funny how you mentioned you're on a permanent vacation, but you still have a routine every day. Even retired people, you get up and you have a routine. You have a routine daily life that you live. And sometimes you just need to get away from that. Even if it's go to the mountains for a couple of days or something. Larry?
Tom, I think what we're looking for in vacation is satisfaction. And what if we look at it from the standpoint that we know someone that's in really, really need, and that any type of financial help that we could give them would help. And so we're planning a $5,000 to $7,000 vacation. And we decide that we're going to go up to Blue Ridge or somewhere for a week and spend about $1,500, $2,000 and use that balance to help those that are in need. I think sometimes greater satisfaction comes from something like this.
Okay. Spending your time and your money, right? Some people do that. Are there things, speaking of the everyday routine in life, are there things about the everyday routine in life that might cause us to be less aware of? What are some of those things? You have a routine, right? Every day, especially people that work. You get up a certain time, you get your coffee, you do this, you take the dog out, you get the kids to school, whatever you're doing. But that routine is the same 5 days a week for the most part. Is there anything about the daily routine of life that dullens us, that makes us less sharp about things that are important? What are some of those things?
Television.
Frank, did you have something? Prayer. Okay. Makes you less aware of prayer, right? We get into a routine, and somebody mentioned it, you can just go you always have these fancy, the marquees that have the quippy sayings, but it's like, 7 days without prayer makes 1 week, right? Everybody's seen that one. But you can go. I found myself when I was working 10, 12-hour days, I come home, go to bed, play with the dog a little bit, kiss the kids, kiss the wife, go to bed, get up, do the same thing next day. And it's like, oh my goodness, I haven't prayed in 3 days. Sometimes that's happened. So yes, prayer. Things that are spiritual, sometimes we tend to lose, and that's kind of where we're going with this. While special occasions, fastings, religious celebrations, Thanksgivings can be advantageous, it is important for us to understand that our relationship with God doesn't have to be limited to special occasions. Growing up Catholic, there was, confirmation, and there was the Holy Communion, and there was all this special ritual stuff they did. And everybody got together and dressed really nice and was on their best behavior and all that kind of stuff. But is it the same way in the church sometimes, right? Well, think about that for a minute. It's not really it's kind of rhetorical. It's a church like that. We come to work, we dress all nice and everything, and come to work come to church on Sunday and worship. And sometimes, we just get into that routine, and we get ritualistic. It will be our purpose to focus on the idea that we can be a spiritual person with a vibrant relationship with God on an everyday basis. That's kind of what we're headed with this. On an everyday basis, not just on special occasions. So the next few studies together, we want to study some of the Psalms that David wrote. David, next to Jesus, is probably my favorite Bible personality. I love David's life. It was a roller coaster, right? We know that, right? Set out, he was God's anointed, and then, Saul's trying to kill him, and blah, 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 and he goes, and then, of course, he reaches the pinnacle of his, and then he, what happens with Bathsheba, and after that, and his life and then he comes back up again. Because what do we know about David? What's the thing? 1 Samuel 13:14 says what? What is David? How is David described? It's the way everybody describes David.
He's a man after God's own heart.
That's it. A man after God's own heart. In the Psalms that he wrote, we are actually reading a reflection of David's relationship with the Lord. As we study each of these Psalms in the coming weeks, we'll ask ourselves, what does it mean to have a heart for God? So go ahead and turn to Psalm 63. Psalm number 63. But we're going to go ahead and start in a different way. We're going to sing a song. Number 15. Everybody get a songbook if you want to sing. And we're going to sing number 15. Everybody got it? All right, let's sing. O God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. O God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways, and step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days, and I will follow you all of my days, and I will follow you all of my days, and step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. Psalm 63:1. O God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water. When David refers to his relationship with the Lord, he talks of being thirsty. Why do you suppose he uses that particular expression? The expression thirsty. Why would he use thirsty?
I don't know. Thirsty leads to me as like a desperation. You know, when you're thirsty, you're like just dying to have that quenched, and it's a need to be filled with water or liquids. Well, it's the same way when you thirst for God, you're thirsting for His Word, what He wants.
Okay. I think we all can agree on that. Okay, Barbara?
You can't live without water.
That's right. And he makes that comparison, right? And David spent a lot of time in the deserts of Judah, running and trying to stay alive, stay away from Saul and his people, to indicate that seeking God was just as essential to his spiritual life as water was to his physical survival. And it is a desperation thing, you know. I mean, I get thirsty through the course of the day, but I can just drive over to the clubhouse and get a drink if I want to. It's always available. We always have a water fountain close or something, right? So we don't, to be thirsty to the point to where you're desperate to cling to your life, that's what he's talking about. The title of this psalm is "My Soul Thirsts for You." That's the title, of course, we've given it. But the psalm indicates that it was written when David was in the desert. And that environment thirst would be a natural expression to use when referring to something very important or desirable. And God was that. Without a spiritual dimension to our nature, life becomes very dry indeed. What sort of things do unspiritual people seek to fill that void? For unspiritual people, what would they turn to fill the void, right? You can fill that with many things, right? Anything worldly, right? Pretty much. Carnal, fill in the blank, you know. So unspiritual people are constantly seeking to fill that void with things that only destroy your flesh rather than refresh your spirit. My life as a Catholic, as you sometimes know, everything was a ritual. Everything was a ritual. When I first started going to worship with Elizabeth and men got up there to pray, it was like they were up there and they were saying words that they wanted to say, as opposed to looking in a little book where the prayer was already written in there and you just kind of repeated it. So everything was ritualistic. And like I mentioned before, we as Christians can be ritualistic as well. You can get bored with your religious practices. Okay, you can get bored with coming here and doing things the same way. We have a process of how we go through an orderly worship. The Lord's Supper at a certain time, this is a certain time, that's a certain time, and that's the way God wants it orderly. But it could be boring if you're not engaged, if you don't have a spiritual connection, if you don't keep that alive. If it dries out on you and you're not giving it any water, it's not going to live, even if you're coming to the building and you're sitting in that pew 4 times a week. Yes, sir.
On Sunday morning, Sharon and I don't get up and say, well, are we going to go to church this morning? It is part of our lives, and we automatically start getting ready to come to church because this is at least part, but most part of our lives.
Yes, you come to assemble, correct? Brother Joe brought that point out just a couple of weeks ago as we were talking about assembling. We assemble for many reasons. If you read in Acts 2, and you after like from 41 to 44, and we spent years studying this when we were at Buford, but fellowship with God and fellowship with each other, that's assembling. We don't have to assemble to worship. We assemble to have a potluck. We assemble to have a singing. We assemble to go to a picnic. We assemble to go to a ball game if we're going as a group, right? It's having that assembling. Let's go to assemble. And what we're doing this morning is worship. But that fellowship, worship is part of that giant fellowship umbrella. So it's that fellowshipping with one another and fellowshipping with God. So that's a good point. Thank you. It's part of your life. It's not just an event we do.
We mentioned the other day in class that there was 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing.
Right.
And the question was asked, how do you do that?
Right.
So we don't pray all the time, obviously, but you have an attitude of prayer constantly. You always have you're living it. It's not something that you just stop and do. I feel that I can pray anytime, anywhere. I don't have to me, it's kind of like that's part of you. And God is always listening to you. He will always hear your earnest plea, no matter whether you bow your head and you're in the assembly or you're driving down the road. If you petition God, He will hear you. And I believe that that's the difference in being a Christian and trying to kind of fit a mold or do, something to say, well, I've had my prayer today. I've done this today. I've read my Bible today.
Right.
If you're living it, then you will think about the scriptures. Thy word have I hid in my heart, David said, that I might not sin against thee. The whole point is you're living it. It's not something that you stop and do like you eat. You're constantly feeding it, and it's constantly part of you. And when you're battling temptations or something like that, God's there. I mean, you're fighting the battle. But.
John.
On that same note, when we assemble together, we should picture that Christ is sitting with us, part of the congregation. When we have communion, we should picture him going through what he went through during his death, burial. It should be that close. He should be like sitting right here as part of us, doing what we do.
And he is here with us, right? He's here with us. Kim?
When you talk about fellowship, I think that, that is extremely important, especially outside of the church worship, because we're supposed to be one with another. I mean, that's what God intended. I mean, you look back in Acts, they lived as one. They were all together. They went to each other's houses. They were constantly with each other and constantly focused on the Lord. Where I think today it's a little bit more difficult because we're all kind of spread out where we live, and circumstances are how they are. We work, we have all these, and that kind of separates us a little bit. So to have those extra things of, the extra events that we could, participate in, I think brings us closer together with God. It brings us into focus with like-minded people.
Okay, it's my understanding that anytime two or more are gathered in his name, he is with you. And I believe that with all my heart. So anytime we fellowship together in God's name, God is with us.
That's right. I can't use my hands. That's bad for me. We have Jesus, but who do we have to help us? The Holy Spirit. Okay, so the Holy Spirit is constantly going to intercede with the Father for us. If you have the right attitude and you're attitudely, you're driving down the road and your attitude is still, you're not going to stop, close your eyes and pray while you're driving. That's always been that big example. So, having the Spirit interceding for us as well helps with that. This is why I don't like technology, okay? Just so I can let you know. That's okay. I can use my hands now. That's right. That's important. Woo! Okay. Back on task. You mentioned checking off checklist Christianity. The Pharisees and the Pharisees were trying to. They had the law. The law was that. It wasn't Christianity, but it was checklist, right? It was 613 commandments, and we just, okay, I did that, I did that, I did that. I cleansed myself because there was a dead whatever over here, and I had to walk over here across the street and go home and wash my hands 7 times or whatever it might say. It was checklist. All right, this is a thing, okay? This is becoming a process. So that's important, that it doesn't become boring and ritualistic. And your spirituality towards God is what's going to keep it vibrant. And your relationship with the Lord. So let's go ahead and go to verse 2 of Psalm 63. Actually, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. So I have looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory, because your loving kindness is better than life. My lips shall praise you. Thus I will bless you while I live. I will lift up my hands in your name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise you with joyful lips.
Don't turn that on.
Is it ready to roll?
I'll turn it on back there.
Oh, so he's turning it on back there. So ready to go? Okay. All right. My daughter's sitting over there going, "What an idiot." She's probably not wrong. Here David speaks of the deep satisfaction he derives from worship. In your opinion, how does worship equip us to face the routine of everyday life? We all have a routine of our everyday lives. How does worship equip us for that and enhance that?
When you're working your regular job, you are also working to please God by doing a good job wherever you are and whatever you do. You are, in a way, praising God by the way you conduct yourself honestly and truthfully with your employer.
Okay.
Okay. I always feel like when we come together and worship and we come together in fellowship, that it gives us the energy to do our everyday routine when we're away from the other Christians.
Okay, good comment.
It reminds me of the story of Elijah when Elijah felt he was all alone, and everybody was seeking his life, and he was in a frenzy, and God tells him, rest, get something to eat. And then God wasn't, he wasn't in the tornado or whatever was going on. He was in that quiet, still voice. We have to get to that place sometimes to to encounter God the best.
Okay.
When God becomes your best friend and he's the driving force of your happiness, he's with you everywhere all the time, and whatever you do is better. Whatever.
Okay. What do we kind of, Kim?
Now I'm waiting when I wasn't before. I just talk. I think it teaches us how to deal with the things that we have to go through. I mean, it's funny because I sit in the pew and I would swear that the preacher had been in my mind and had been, the things that I had been thinking on before. It was like, all of a sudden I come to church and that subject's being taught, and I'm like, just like now, what we're talking about now, I've been seeking a more deeper spiritual relationship with God because I don't think I've ever really had that. I think I've been a pew filler. And so I've been seeking, and it's kind of like, what did you get in my head? And so I learn, from what I'm being taught, and it helps me to get through the following week and to implement things that I learned at the pulpit.
Okay. So it brings out things that maybe you're already thinking about in your life that you need to do. You can get instruction there. Energy, right? How do you feel sometimes if you go to you're here Sunday morning and Sunday night, but you miss Wednesday, and you come back next Sunday. But suppose those of you who have been ill or in injuries or whatever, and we go several Sundays, we can watch the stream. Or during COVID, we went 13 weeks without meeting. How did you feel? Right, Amy?
We only missed 1 week during COVID, and the second week we watched it on live stream because the elders here held services.
Okay.
And the second week, and the first week when we watched it on live stream, I heard Miss Georgia, who's a member who's since passed on, singing in the pew. So I told Clyde, if she can go, we can go. So we went back the next week, and we've been ever since.
Okay.
That's one of the great things about the eldership here.
Okay. Well, we didn't go at Buford for, I think it was 11 weeks. I think I was wrong. I think it was 13. I think it was 11. But how did you feel, or how do you feel if you miss two services in a row, right? It has an effect on you. You're disconnected, right? Exactly, okay? And that disconnection, you can watch the stream, and that's a substitution of a sort, but it's not fellowship, and it's not being together. I can remember Kyle, our minister over at Buford, when we finally got back, it was like the energy that was in that auditorium, because he was just, we're back. We can be together. And whatever you did, whether it was missing a week or missing 12 weeks or whatever, the point is there was a time that you couldn't be together as brothers and sisters. And it affects you. That midweek Bible study, because once you come out of here on Sunday and you start going, whatever it is that you deal with or are dealing with, and you don't know Monday morning, all of a sudden there's going to be challenges. Wednesday night, we'll be done in 2 minutes, because this is going to be a week-on thing. There's going to be challenges to face, but that Wednesday night you can come back together and we get energized. That was brought out. I like the word energy, because you do. We get energized by being together and studying the Word and singing some songs and all that kind of stuff that we do. That's all part of that fellowship. And we need that to get through to the next time, So that's important. That's important. So we'll pick up here next week. I think this is going to be a good study, but it's going to be a lot of discussion and a lot of because this is stuff we need to do to build our spirituality to God. Our spiritual, we need to grow closer, and we need to have a deeper relationship. And David's words will give us thought provoking. So thank you so much for your comments.